Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Tips for Student Self-Advocates. Michigan Alliance for Families assists parents in understanding their special education rights, communicating their children's needs, and finding information to help their children develop and learn. We offer resources and information for families and young adults birth to age 26 receive or might be eligible to receive special education services. We do have an up-to-date COVID-19 specific page on our website, michiganallianceforfamilies.org. You'll find executive orders, guidance documents from Michigan Department of Education, and more. Links to all of the resources we're going to talk about today are available there as a one-page handout. The work of Michigan Alliance for Families is done on a regional basis. No matter where you are in Michigan, you can connect with a mentor who is knowledgeable about state and local resources and can assist you in navigating the educational system and finding answers to your questions. All of our staff at Michigan Alliance for Families are parents or close family members of an individual with a disability who has firsthand experience with the special education system. We're all facing difficult decisions as we prepare for the return to school. Today's webinar is the final in a series of 3 return to school conversations with Michigan Alliance for Families parent mentors. Hopefully these have provided some guidance and things to consider as you decide what returning to school looks like for your child. As parents, we model advocacy skills, and as our children grow up, we help them learn and practice their own self-advocacy skills. Let me introduce today's parent mentor presenters. First, we have Andrea Sargent. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, I am Andrea Sargent, and I am the Regional Parent Mentor for the West Michigan region covering Mason, Lake, Oceana, Muskegon, and Newaygo counties. I am the mother of 6, and several of my children receive the supports and services of special education through either an individualized education plan, which is an IEP, or through the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504.
Thank you, Andrea. We also have Jackie Van Horn with us today. Hi, Jackie.
Good afternoon. I'm Jackie Van Horn, and I cover Berrien, Cass, and Van Buren counties. I have 2 sons, one of which is on the Asperger's end of the autism spectrum. He's a junior in high school and in all general education classes with accommodations and supports, with check-ins once a week with his special education caseworker.
Thank you, Jackie. So that brings us to today's webinar topic, Tips for Student Self-Advocates. We will discuss the 6 W's of self-advocacy, understanding the chain of command and hierarchy, and helping your students self-advocate during distance learning. I'll ask questions and we will hear from our parent mentors how they are encouraging self-advocacy during these pandemic times. Ladies, let's turn our cameras on now. Perfect, thank you. All right, how would you describe self-advocacy?
Well, I think self-advocacy starts with 2 items. First is knowing when to ask for help. When a person is advocating for themselves, it may be difficult to understand when they've reached a point that they need to ask for support. It may be helpful to keep track of all the things that they've already tried in order to complete the task or assignment to no avail. Then it is knowing how to ask for help. This has a lot of factors to it. It's finding out who they should contact, through which means, whether email or phone call or even Instagram message. Then it's how to put all the things that they tried and the questions that remain in a clear and concise way so that they can get the most helpful response.
Thank you, Andrea.
Self-advocacy is a set of skills that includes speaking up for yourself. It's communicating what your strengths and weaknesses are and the best way that you learn, what your needs are, what your wishes are. It's being able to listen to the opinions of others, even when their opinions differ from yours. That's an important thing. You can still disagree and have an open and clear discussion. It's having responsibility for yourself and a sense of self-respect, knowing your rights, which is very important, and knowing where to go to get help and to get answers to a question.
So we start with when to ask for help and how. All these are important self-advocacy skills, not only for the adults, but also for our children. And as adults, we're teaching our kids these important skills so that they can take them into the adult world. This resource here is a fantastic resource on our page, and it has a lot of great information for you and your child.
Let's talk about the 6 W's of self-advocacy. What are they and why are they important?
A long time ago in a journalism class, my teacher taught us the 6 W's of a story: the who, what, when, where, why, and how of something. If you knew all of those W's, you have a complete story. When I began teaching my children how to self-advocate, I used my old journalism teacher's approach. If they have the list of W's of an assignment or a project, they should be able to effectively complete the task. So we'll just go through the 6 W's. Who? Who are you doing this task for? This may be the teacher or a coach or a service provider. Make sure you know their name with the correct spelling. And then what? What is the assignment? Being specific is helpful. So rather than saying a report, it's good to write down a 5-page essay regarding the Federalist Papers. When? This is a pretty easy one. It's the due date. Where? Knowing where do you turn it in? Is it in an email? Is it in a video format? Do you submit via Canvas or Google Classroom? Or is it dropped off at the school or in a thumb drive? It's knowing where you need to do this to complete the task. Then the next one is why. This one is what used to mess up my kids quite a bit when they were learning how to self-advocate. It's understanding the goal or the concept of the project, task, or assignment is supposed to teach you. So if you all know that it's supposed to do a report on the Federalist Papers and it's due in 2 weeks, but don't know what exactly that report is supposed to cover, you probably won't be very successful. Some teachers place the concept or standard on the whiteboard every day. If you understand you're supposed to learn and know after completing the assignment, that can be pretty helpful. So James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton authored and published a collection of 85 articles and essays in 1788 in order to promote the ratification of the US Constitution. That might provide a more complete picture of what you need to do rather than just a report. And then how? This is about having everything that you need to complete a task. Do you need textbook or handout? Do you just need pencil and paper? Do you need a computer and access to a printer? Does it need to be sent to the teacher in a certain format? And do you know what that format is? And do you have the app or the program necessary to do so? Essentially, how do you need to turn this project in? And do you have everything? As you can tell, a lot of the W's kind of go together, and that's okay. But if you run through them all together, you may realize, I know I'm doing this for Mrs. Smith, and I know it's a 5-page essay regarding the Federalist paper that is due in 2 weeks, but I don't know where I'm supposed to turn it in, and I don't have my textbook. You'll find the holes in your story, and you'll be able to communicate all of that to your teacher and give a clear picture of what you need and get a good answer to help.
We've talked about the W's of self-advocacy. What happens if the student has all of their W's and they're still stuck? What should we do then?
Students need to understand that there is a chain of command, understanding the proper hierarchy, details, and the importance of the key players. And another question is too, once our student starts to go up the chain of command, at what point do us parents step in to provide greater support in helping them develop their voice? So this is a very good visual of what the chain of command is, starting down with the teacher. It's always best to start talking with your teacher because a lot of concerns, questions, and misunderstandings can be handled right there in the classroom. And then the next step up would be an IEP case manager to the building principal. And many times questions, concerns can be taken care of right at those levels. And then next, the district special education supervisor. Then continuing on up to the superintendent. And then of course, the last resort is the ISD special education director. Now, when you're teaching about the proper hierarchy, you want to make sure that your student understands that starting down at the local level is always best, starting with that teacher. because many times things can get worked out easily. Once you start going up the chain of command, that's when things get, I guess, a little more escalated, to put it gently. And when should a parent step in? Ultimately, we're our children's guide in this process. So we're going to teach them the tools to go up the chain of command, because that's a great work skill once they get out into the workforce or even in the adulting life. But sometimes there is an uneven power dynamic. And when you are talking, like in our case, a middle school student who is 13, 14 years old as compared to a teacher, there is uneven power dynamic naturally built into that system. So with that being said, sometimes a parent has to step in. Now, for us, my son was in 8th grade at the time, and he was in a class where the classroom expectation was that students would sit and watch the teacher lecture for 30 minutes. And with my son having autism, eye contact can be very painful for extended periods of time. So built into his plan, he's allowed to fold paper. And so he would create little origami creatures while he's listening to the teacher's lecture, and he was carrying an A in the class. Well, the teacher did not appreciate or understand what Mike was trying to do while he was folding. All her concerns were is that he was not following the protocol of the class. And so he tried to explain to the teacher and also a special education teacher that this does not work for me. Now, when you have a middle school boy, sometimes they can be thought of as being defiant, stubborn, obstinate, insubordinate. So my son started being suspended for being insubordinate in the classroom. We went up the chain of command to the building principal, and at which point we felt we were not being heard because the suspensions continued and the redirection in the classroom continued, and my son's behaviors started to change. He started to have avoidance skills in the classroom. He started shutting down, and at that point my son says to me, "Who's in charge of all this?" So I said, "Well, the next step, because we've talked to your teacher, your special education caseworker, and now the principal, the next step would be to talk to your special education director." He says, "I want to have a meeting with her." So my 14-year-old son is calling for a meeting. So I asked her if she would be open, and she said absolutely she would. So I helped him to put his thoughts down on paper and make sure his thoughts were clear as to what his concerns and his needs were. We went in, I let him have the meeting with her. She spoke directly with him. And based on that meeting, we actually had some great solutions come out of there that went and followed him into high school, which is ultimately what you want to happen. So at that point, I then let my son take over his own advocacy again, but I continue to monitor the steps and I continue to guide him in verbiage he needs to use or steps he needs to take place.
Thank you. Once a student learns about the appropriate chain of command, what are effective ways to communicate to the proper people?
Actually, there's several ways that a student can communicate with the appropriate key people. It just depends on what the situation might be and depends on what the preferential form of contact each person wants. So some teachers like text messages, some teachers prefer email, some teachers prefer face-to-face. And when you speak in person or have a face-to-face meeting, the question is, does it require an appointment? And if so, how to set an appointment instead of just walking in between classes and say, Mrs. Smith, I need to talk to you right now. It's more of, Mrs. Smith, what time would be good for us to sit down and talk? And then some teachers do appreciate a phone call, but I'm seeing more and more in the age of electronics, more email, whether it's inter-school email or through Google Classroom in our case. So it's teaching our student the appropriate way to contact
Yep, I encourage my own kids to use email for a couple of reasons. First, it creates a written record with a time and date stamp of when you reached out for help or guidance. Second, you can always go back and look at the information again to see if you have everything that you need. You're not depending upon your memory for all the little details. So I'm going to work through how to send a proper email. First, who should you send it to? If you're just going to ask for clarification about a single assignment, sending it to only the teacher is probably all you need. And as Jackie was talking about earlier with that ladder, it's knowing when you should move up the ladder.
Thank you, Andrea. How does a student know the email address that they should be using?
That's a really good question, and one that unfortunately I can't answer specifically because it depends. Some schools have all their teachers listed on the school district's website. Maybe your teacher gave you a syllabus and it's listed on that. Sometimes you might have to call the front office and ask. It may take a little bit of detective work to find it, but when you do, double check the spelling. For example, in our school, we have a husband and wife that teach in elementary school and in the high school, and their names both begin with the same first initial. So one has first initial, middle initial, last name. One has just first initial and last name. And if you don't know who exactly you're sending it to, you might be sending your high school email to an elementary school person. So you want to make sure that you know exactly who you're supposed to be sending it to and double check.
And that's a problem that we had happen with a middle school and a high school teacher, husband and wife, same first initial. So, and then one other way that we find our email addresses is we have software that's on our cell phones so that I can check my kids' grades at any point. And with that being said, in the schedule, if you shift over, the teacher's email address is located right there. And sometimes you can send the email directly from that software.
That's the next point that we want to make is if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. We stress this in a lot of our webinars. Having things in writing, again, it provides a time and date stamp of when something was said, and you're not depending upon everybody else's memory of the situation. It's a good way to just make sure that you're sharing the same information to everyone across the board. So if it's not in writing, it didn't happen.
And if you have a face-to-face conversation or an over-the-phone conversation, following it up with an email that summarizes what was said during that conversation is always a great way to double check to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Good tips. So once you've figured out where to find the email address, what should the email say?
This is something you're going to use over and over again, far beyond when you're done with school. It's kind of a life skill. You want to be concise. You don't want to have like the whole story beginning with the beginning of time. You want to make it to what the issue is happening at this precise point in history. You want to state the problem or question clearly. You want to list all of the information and facts or pertinent information. This is where we talked about, I've tried this and this and this and this, and I've gone to these places and tried these resources, and this is the problem that I'm still having. Once the teacher knows that you've tried all of those things and not just sending an email that says, I don't know what to do. If you're just like, I've tried this, I've gone here, I've looked here, and I can't get an answer, putting that all in the email is a really good thing to do. And here we're going to talk about sending an email. So yours may look a little different because everybody uses a different email program, but they all look similar. So it should look something like this. The first thing that you want to know is to. That's where you double check the spelling, and you want to make sure that you know who you're sending it to. If you're sending it to just the teacher, if you're sending it to the teacher and your aide, or the teacher and the special education teacher, you want to make sure that you know their name. The second is called CC, or carbon copy. I really like using this once if you're not just asking a question about an assignment, but the situation has escalated to you're having a difference of opinion, or you're continuing to be stuck. This is a good time to use CC. It's carbon copy, and it's when you can include or rope in your principal, your vice principal, your counselor, your special ed teacher. This is when you start including other people in the conversation, like what Jackie dealt with when her son took it to the director of special education. When you start using CC, it's letting everybody know that there's a problem here and trying to get all the people that could help work it out all on the same page. The next thing is BCC. That's when you send it to somebody and the main person, the main recipient, doesn't know you're sending it to them. So they're getting kind of a secret message, like this is going on, and it's less transparent than carbon copy. I don't recommend that you use it in a school setting. I think transparency is really good, but you might want to include your parent as a BCC so that they know what's going on. They know that you're trying to advocate and that this situation is escalating. The next is the subject line. This is pretty important. You just want to put a clear, concise, short statement, which could be the assignment, the question. I always try to put Mrs. Smith's 4th hour history class, Federalist Papers assignment. And then the body, this is where you put all of your questions, all of your concerns. This is when you write everything that's going on. I want to stress this is where you use appropriate tone. I always tell my kids that they should be able to read this, whatever they wrote, to their grandmother, their pastor, the chief of police, or a judge. If you would not feel comfortable reading that to your grandmother, then you probably shouldn't be writing it to your teacher. And remember to sign it using your first name and your last name. You can't assume that you're the only Quinn or Claire that this teacher teaches in all of their classes. So use all of that information.
I know in my son's class there's 4 Michaels, so it definitely makes it confusing. And another important thing too is I know in the age of texting, make sure your student understands not to use text speak. IKR is not appropriate. And so make sure they're using proper spelling, proper punctuation, and those are things that can be taught in the process. Now, every time my son sends an email, I do make sure that he carbon copies me on it. That way I'm in the loop, I know what's going on, and usually the teachers do respond back with me carbon copied as well. The link in this information is from the National Family Advocacy and Support Training Project, FAST, and is available on our resource page.
All right, next up, how do you balance when to let the student advocate for themselves and when you as a parent need to step in to provide more support?
Well, hopefully by the time that your children are the age of ours, and both of us have teenagers, they will have seen advocacy from their parents, and so they'll be able to take the baton and go. So it's a constant mentoring process with our children as they grow. We guide and mentor them until there's a sticky point in the process. So like the power dynamic that I spoke about earlier, where it's a middle school student and trying to talk to a teacher, you want to make sure that you're close enough to understand and see what's going on so you can guide them from the sidelines. But if you see that there's something that is not being translated right, or if something is starting to go sideways, you can step in immediately. And then once you take over contact, you're going to show your student exactly how to, if it went sideways, how to bring it back so that you can progress forward. And then also too, once it gets to a point where things are moving forward again, you can then hand the baton back off to your student.
Yeah. And I my children, it's trying to, especially with my son who is also on the autism spectrum, when he is unclear on how to do an assignment, he procrastinates. It's not necessarily laziness. He's overwhelmed by what he has to do, so he procrastinates. It's understanding what that looks like versus when he is extremely frustrated. He's tried everything that he knows to do and he is getting nowhere and he is frustrated. So if he's kept me in the loop via CC and I know what's going on and I know he's tried multiple things and he's just not getting anywhere, I know he's not just procrastinating, he's frustrated. And that's a good time for me to step in and just say, sometimes it's just talking it out with him. Like, do you need me to get involved? Do you need help? Do you need me to just talk you through it? Or, do you just need a boop in the butt to get going? It's understanding the difference between procrastination, frustration, and when do you step in?
This is a great resource for effective advocacy. Your student can learn from you, and it's included on our resource page being shared today.
How do you help students develop finding their voice?
Well, first we should recognize that every student shares their voice in a different way. It may not always be via spoken language or in writing. I personally, I don't like being on camera. It's not something I'm comfortable with. It's not something my daughter's terribly comfortable with either. So voice recording is probably something that I would rather do than do a video recording. I prefer writing. I prefer email or text versus a face-to-face meeting. So it's understanding what way your student wants to speak to anybody and what they prefer. It's, it may be drawing, it may be doing a poster, or there's all sorts of different ways. So ask your student, what do they mostly feel comfortable doing, and start there.
And it starts in elementary school. So asking your student about what helps them and what makes it hard in class. And if you're familiar with the present level of academic achievement and functional performance part of your IEP, and if you're not, we do offer IEP webinars on that. There's a parent's concern and information area in that, and you're able to give your student a voice by asking them, okay, Bobby, I know you're in math, and it's third grade math. What makes math so hard for you? What would help you? And of course, not being there sometimes comes up, and you just redirect your student back and saying, okay, but so we're there. What makes it hard? Oh, you've got Tommy over here and he's tapping his pencil the whole time. How can we help you so you're not hearing Tommy tap his pencil the whole time? So it's giving them a chance to say, this is what's working for me, this is what's not working for me, and that can start right in elementary school. And then explaining, what is the IEP? What is their plan? If they understand what their accommodations are, what their supports are, then it makes it their plan, and they're able to speak up and say, I'm supposed to be able to fold paper while I'm listening to instruction, or I'm supposed to be able to wear my headphones and listen to music while we're doing independent work. When they're able to use the correct words and they understand what is their supports and what is in that plan for them, they can speak up for themselves. And then finally, explaining the meetings that we meet once a year to talk about you and how you're doing and what you need, and how fourth grade, this didn't work, so we're going to change it going into fifth grade, so that they realize that these meetings are not about just bad things. It's about the good things and what can we do to make you successful. And then we talk about attending meetings, what to wear, what happens in a meeting, and behavior expectations. So once my son was in 8th grade, he attended the transition to high school meeting. So we talked about how we don't show up in ripped pants and a ripped t-shirt. We show up dressed a little bit nicer with our hair combed. and grooming for teenage boys can be a question. And then it gives us a chance to talk about behavior expectations that will stretch further on into the adult years. Finally, we talk about speaking up at meetings. So when you speak up at a meeting, it doesn't have to be verbal participation. It could be bringing a written statement. It could be mom reads this written statement that I typed up. It could be voicing your concerns in person. And I like Andrea's idea of the poster, because this gives our kids a chance to talk about their concerns and talk about what works, but not necessarily in a verbal manner, because that doesn't work for everybody. And then finally, who to contact when there's concerns. So like my son asking for the meeting with who's in charge. And then when I tell him who that next person is in the chain of command, now he knows we call a meeting with the special education director after we've gone up the chain.
Some good starter questions to self-advocacy are, what do you want to learn this year? I know that my middle daughter, one of the things that she really, really worried about her last year of high school was she was worried that she wasn't going to be successful in her math class. And that was an overarching theme for her the whole year was, am I going to be successful? Am I going to be successful? So being able to articulate that you have a concern or you really want to be able to learn something and do it well, have mastery of a particular idea. Being able to say that in your own words, in whatever means work for you the best, is really helpful. The next is how do you learn? I know for my youngest daughter, she does much better if it has earphones in, if she can be listening to music. She's one of those students that if everybody's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, she will end up becoming focused on the student that's not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then she loses track of what she's supposed to be doing because she's so focused on the other student. So learning that if she has the earphones in so she can't hear Timmy tapping his pencil is really helpful. And then having all of the tools that you need to be successful, which sometimes can include your IEP, knowing that what your IEP says and what you're allowed to go take a test in a quiet setting, or you're allowed to have earphones, and being able to say to your teacher, according to my IEP, I can, and knowing what those things are. If you have all of those things together and you're aware of them and you can speak them or communicate them clearly, that makes learning easier for your child.
And all these resources that Andrea just shared are included in this resource that will be on our resource page.
Another resource is our website, which is incredibly helpful and where there is additional resources or information and articles with additional ideas. I can't stress strongly enough how helpful our website is. Please check it out and you will get all the information you could possibly need.
Have you had any good or bad experiences working through self-advocacy with your child that you can share with us?
We've had some good ones. Working with the special education director when Mike called that meeting, that was fantastic. And when he came out of there, he was like, wow, she listened to me. And then for him to see later that things were put into place that he needed, it really was a great experience for him. Bad, I would say definitely middle school with the stereotype of a lazy teenage boy versus Mike's behavior being communication. When my son is struggling, he tends to shut down. And at that time, he would put his hood over his head or put his head on his desk. He would not, he would become nonverbal. And so that was looked upon as refusing to participate in class. So at that point, helping staff understand that his behaviors are actually saying, I'm overloaded, give me 5 minutes to regroup, and then I will participate again, versus I'm just being stubborn and insubordinate and I don't want to be here. That was a struggle. But again, it's about behaviors communication and trying to help teachers understand what that communication was actually saying. Once we got past that, things did get better. But again, I had to step in at that point.
Having 6 kids, I have a lot of incidences, but I'm only gonna limit myself to 2. One is with my youngest daughter. It was a teacher who had a preconceived notion of who my daughter was based upon my son. This teacher and my son didn't get along very well. And when my daughter started with the class 2 years later, she was determined that the teacher was going to see that she was different from her brother, and she was determined that he was going to appreciate her as a student. But the teacher didn't really even give her a chance. The teacher wouldn't allow her to answer when questions were posed. When she tried to ask for help, he would ignore her or give her incomplete answers. And she put up with that for about 2 weeks. And at the beginning of the 3rd week, without consulting me at all, she made an appointment with the principal, and she went in with a list and said, this teacher is negatively impacting my ability to learn in the following ways. And then she listed them all. And one was not calling on me to answer questions, not letting me ask questions, not allowing me to participate equally in the class discussions. I think she had 9 items. And the principal, when he called me, he laughed and said that apple did not fall far from the tree. And he spoke with the teacher, and there was no longer a problem at all. She was allowed to participate equally, and the teacher did ultimately see that she was not the same as her brother, and she was allowed to complete the class successfully. The second is my son, who has autism. He led a walkout in his class. It was a subject with a curriculum that wasn't created by the teacher who was teaching it. The teacher, unbeknownst to the students, was struggling with the setup of the curriculum, and he was having his own problems. And the students were also struggling. So a lot of the students were dropping the class. And my son didn't want to do that. He was determined to finish the class and finish it successfully. So he encouraged the remaining students of the class to go with him down to the principal to explain that things were not going well, and they also had a list of this is where we are struggling, and ask how to improve. And the end result was that first my son and the rest of his class ended up completing the class, but the next year the teacher exchanged that class with another teacher's class, and a different teacher taught it with much better results. Through no one's fault, the original teacher and that curriculum just weren't a good fit. And I'd like to think that the front office just didn't know the depths of the problem. And if my son had not led that walkout, we might have just ended up dropping this really valuable program. And so by leading this walkout and leading others in his class to also advocate with him, they found a solution that worked better for the teachers, worked better for the students, and worked better for the school. So sometimes it's more than just one person, one problem. It was solved across the board, which I think was a really good outcome.
What about self-advocacy during these challenging times where many students may be learning remotely? Are there things students can do to advocate and improve communication over a distance?
Oh, email is a really effective strategy and it helps you share what is and what isn't working. The beauty of email too is you can write the email, and before you send it, you can go back and re-edit it so you can make sure your points are getting across clearly. The nice thing with email too is it's also a time for parents to check in to help figure out solutions. And that can be done also with learning remotely. It's nice because us parents can get a view of what's going on in the classroom by, staying close and listening in. It gives us a chance to be a better participant in their child's education. So again, we can look at what is and what isn't working and then help our student be able to send that email to the teacher or have a private chat with the teacher, a private Zoom meeting, so that they can explain what is and what's not working.
Yep. And I agree, email. All of those things are things that I think work really well. I also think understanding how long an assignment or a task should take. If a student knows upfront that this task should take you 20 to 30 minutes and they've been working on it for an hour, that could kind of give them a clue that they don't really have what they need or they're not really grasping the concept. And that's a good cue that it's time to ask for help. And so you can always ask have your student ask the teacher about how long should this take. And then if it's taking too long, they can tell their teacher, I've been working on this for this amount of time and I'm not getting anywhere. That also helps them communicate and helps them plan what they should do next. There's also some other things that you can do. Embracing organization. Understanding that, have a space set aside where everything you need to be successful is there. Keep a calendar, whether it's the calendar in your phone or a calendar. Some classes are using Canvas and there's a calendar there, and a schedule that you can keep to so that you know when you're supposed to do something and things don't get dropped. Take advantage of the opportunities that teachers provide to connect, like office hours. Sometimes it might just be good to check in and say, hey, how are you doing? How am I doing? Am I doing okay? Do you think that I'm turning in good quality work? Is there something that I can be doing differently or better? I know that that's really difficult, especially with younger children. If they don't really know what to say, they may be a little hesitant, but encourage them that teachers are people too. They are there to help. How I like to explain it to my kids is, if you go to a restaurant, think of it as the teacher is your server, and you wouldn't struggle asking your server to ask for extra ranch dressing or ketchup. So you shouldn't struggle with asking your teacher if you need extra help. And then kind of the next level is if the teacher brings you or the server brings you the wrong meal, or the teacher is giving you an assignment that you're really struggling with, you would say something. So those two things kind of connect. And then I always like to give the idea of, and if you're not getting what you want out of your server, you can always ask to speak to the manager. And in this case, if you're not getting what you need from your teacher, you can always ask to speak to the next person up the line, like your principal. And then a big one is get fresh air daily. Get out of your house, take a walk, take a run, take a bike ride, and take some deep breaths of clean air and clear your mind and kind of let it all go. And then you can come back with a clear head and get to work again.
So ways to practice self-advocacy in the virtual classroom. A resource page is being shared today and will include a link to an article that provides some really good ideas for advocating in the virtual environment. They include the following and more. Learning to make modifications on my own and explaining what does and does not work. Explaining what accommodations that I would need in the classroom in my own words. Finding apps and tools that will help me with completing my schoolwork without help. And then sharing what works best for me with my teacher and with others.
Ladies, any last pieces of advice or thoughts?
Absolutely. Self-advocacy is an ongoing process. It's ever evolving. So it's a learning experience. And the learning experience of my son, who brought his IEP to the teacher at the end of class, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. We go into my son's freshman year, and his first class of the day, The teacher has her own specific teaching style. He's not familiar with her. And at the end of class, he walks up to her with his IEP in his hand and he says, "Have you read this?" Instead of saying, "Hi, I'm Mike. I'm having some challenges in your class already. These are some things that work for me." It was a definite learning experience for him. And we got some time to go over it after we got some good laughs and say, yeah, it's really not wise to go up and say, "Hi, have you read this?" So we now have better words to use.
And I already kind of said this before, but I'm just going to reiterate it. I really want my children to know that the teachers are there to help and support them. They want them to be just as successful as I want them to be. They're not there to be a detriment to their education. So trying to convince your child that no, your teacher doesn't not like you, you're just not communicating effectively. Here's some ways that you can work it out. Telling your teacher what you need and how you need it. Don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. Don't be afraid to say, "I'm not getting what I need." And if you're respectful and you're clear, you're going to get there. It's a collaborative effort, and you'll get there if you all work together. This next resource is the National Consortium on Leadership and Disability for Youth Self-Assessment. It's an interesting resource which will be linked on our resource page handout. It provides a comprehensive self-assessment in a variety of areas to help learn where a student's strengths and weaknesses are, to help determine where they may need more focus and assistance in learning to self-advocate.
Helping students learn to advocate is a process over time and not a single event. Students and parents are welcome to reach out to your regional parent mentor for guidance. This map is on our website and it has a list of mentors who cover each region statewide. We are happy and we are here to help you, so please reach out to us.
Andrea, Jackie, thank you so much. We can turn our cameras off now. And I'd like to remind everybody of this other resource that we have, Positive Behavior and Interventions and Supports. This is a webinar series that has strategies for supporting your child learning at home and transitioning back to school. So week 1 already happened, but the recording for that and the 2 handouts are available on our website. And then coming up on September 2 is the second in the series where we talk about expectations. And the third in the series on September 16th focuses on behavior. This webinar and the previous 2 return to school webinars have all been recorded and will be made available on our website for future viewing and review. Michigan Alliance for Families is an IDEA grant-funded initiative of the Michigan Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and we are Michigan's federally funded parent training and information center. Follow-up questions can be directed to us at info@michiganallianceforfamilies.org or call 1-800-552-4821. Thank you.